Jana is our 11-year-old daughter. She's a lot like other girls her age. She likes school some days, likes reading, crafts, animals. A few things set her apart though and make her a little bit different. She has a neuromuscular condition which affects a lot of the muscles in her body and makes mobility a challenge for her, affects her breathing a little bit, and it also means that she's tube fed.
Isaiah was born into a blended family with 6 older brothers and sisters. He was born with a blockage in his bowel, esophageal atresia, which is what it means is his esophagus has a blockage, but what happened is his esophagus didn't develop at all. It ended in a pouch up about his collarbone area. And then there was a wee bit of a stump of an esophagus down on his stomach. So that was the bigger problem that we had no idea about, and they discovered that at birth.
Kaya was born 2 months early with a parasitic twin attached to the roof of her mouth. So it made it so that she couldn't actually take anything in orally. She's one of those happy-go-lucky kids. She doesn't care if there's something wrong with her tube. She says, "Mommy, tube hurt." And she's got an amazing personality and such a strong will that I don't think most people have. So it really makes me look up to her.
We're here today because of Jed, who's an awesome, just had his 12th year birthday. He's in grade 6 at our local school and really happy and in a good place right now for health, so that's great.
Jed having a feeding tube, and it's just all I've ever known. We feed Jed every day with a feeding tube, just like we would feed him with a granola bar or something. It's like totally normal. I don't notice the difference.
I remember that you have this very small baby and you're very worried, so overwhelmed. Having an NG tube, I think, was a challenge. It was brand new for my husband. He had, of course, never seen it before and never experienced that before. Going home with an NG tube, I think the scariest part was knowing that we would possibly have to reinsert that, and we learned that very quickly. But for us, that was one of the most scary things. And although you're trained to do that in the hospital and taught how to do it, it's very different when you're at home trying to do it on your own. The first time that we had to do it, we actually called the home care nurse to come and help us. And she did, and it was nice to have that guidance. But she was also very firm about, you need to do this on your own. So we did it together, my husband and I did it together, if nothing else just for moral support, because babies pull out their NG tubes. I mean, her finger would hook around that little thing in her nose, and there was nothing worse than walking into her room in the middle of the night and the tube is laying there beside her, the milk's pumping into the bed, and you know that you have to put that tube back in. I don't know that you ever feel really good about doing it, ever. Jana had an NG tube for 8 months, so I don't know that you ever feel really good about doing it, but you do learn to get by and you do learn to do it. So the gastroenterologist came to us and he said, you know, you should consider a G tube. And again, I kind of said, okay, I don't think so, I think we're okay. But when she had that G tube, it was almost a sense of relief. I was actually very surprised how much I felt a sense of relief at that point. And I remember then you can look at your daughter's face and you see your daughter's face and you don't see the tube.
The choice for Isaiah to have a G-tube was a very simple choice for us because he needed food and there was no connection from his mouth to his stomach to get that food, so it was very obvious to have a G-tube put in. And he had no complications. He was only a couple days old when he had his G-tube put in, and everything went smoothly. I was exhausted in that first little while. One of the amazing moments of me feeling very proud of myself was when he was in the NICU and he needed his button changed, his G-tube button changed, and the nurse had not yet been trained on that. And I was able to train the nurse on how to change his G-tube. And I felt very empowered at that moment. It's like, you know what, I'm doing a good job and I'm the pro in some of these things. I know more than some of, even these health professionals, and it was really really great on that.
The day she was born, she had everything outside of her mouth removed, and so they left what they call a stump inside, and it basically made it so that she couldn't swallow or anything like that because she couldn't fully close her mouth. And so they tried her with a tube feed through her nose and down to her stomach. So she had an NG tube for a while. She had lots of problems with aspirating and with her reflux, so she was bringing everything that they gave her right back up. And so they eventually moved it to an NJ tube, which was quite challenging because she was one of those habitual pullers. So she was constantly pulling out her tube. They just said, you know, the better option is going to be a G tube just because she's not getting the amount of feed that she needs. It just meant that she would be able to eat. So that's kind of where she ended up at, and got a G tube with a fundoplication. So they kind of tied off a little part of her tummy so that the valve couldn't open back up and she couldn't aspirate, or she couldn't bring any food back up. For me, it was very relieving. It made me comfortable knowing that she could finally eat and get enough nutrition. It really didn't change much as far as the actual feeds go because it was just going through a different area. But it just made it so that it seemed less invasive. It was not in your face or on your face, and I wasn't as worried about pulling it out all the time because it was attached to her and it was secured onto her. So it seemed a little bit more like this is something that's a permanent solution.
I think for families who are concerned about what it's going to be like with a child with a G-tube, I would try to encourage them not to worry about it. I know it's really hard not to, but it's a fairly simple process, fairly simple addition to the body that is easy to manage. Occasionally, you know, his G-tube would stop working and we'd have to replace it. And after a while, you realize that that's actually a very simple process. Initially, it's like, oh, this is very strange, but after a while, you've done it a couple times. It's, yeah, we have to change your G-tube, and okay, lay down, and we do it, and it's very simple, straightforward. I've done it. It's very easy to do. But I can understand the fear because it's something that's foreign. It's not something that they're born with. But it is a very simple thing to manage. It's just a matter of learning it, and then you do it, and you cope with it in that moment, and after a while, you're no longer coping. It's just a regular part of the day, and you don't even think about it.
You can still taste with your mouth, but like I personally do like the G-tube, yeah. But like for Halloween, you can have candy, which is awesome.
Some of the challenges that we faced when she was young, I think, is you are dependent on yourself and your spouse or who's ever in your immediate house to always feed the baby. So the people that are going to help you need to know how to feed her. So there's that challenge of making those close to you feel comfortable with it, and then making them feel competent so they're able to care for Jaina. Teach them to feed your baby, and teach them to feed with an NG or G-tube early, and be there to support them to learn it. Because if you think of how you felt when you're first learning to feed, that's exactly how these people felt, except for it's not their child. If I had to offer tips on how to make those things easier, I would say buy a really great mattress protector and buy lots of sheets for your crib, because your tube feed is going to leak in the night. It's just going to happen. And if you're prepared for that, and you can just toss that off and put clean stuff on, everybody goes back to bed and you deal with it in the morning, it's a lot easier. Our day-to-day life, I guess, for us is our own normal. And I think that's what happened. You deal with what comes your way and it becomes part of your normal. The feeding at school is something that's different. We don't send a lunch, we send a formula, and we have to make sure someone is at school and that they can feed her. Some of our other challenges is if we want to take a holiday or go somewhere, we don't just go with our clothes in a bag. We have to plan ahead. We've got formulas that we carry onto the plane. We've got our pump that we pack. We've got our backup stuff that we need. But it's all doable. And the first time you do it, it's huge and stressful and overwhelming. but you get through it, and then you can do it again, and you know that we can do this, and it's really going to be okay.
Isaiah's still 100% G-tube fed, and it's been a fascinating journey from the beginning to now. It's given him far more freedom to do far more than if he wouldn't have had it. Bringing home all the equipment was overwhelming, I think, for everybody. It sort of hospitalized everything. And I think one of the first things that I did, I got rid of the IV pole because it just felt like the hospital that we had been trying to get away from for so long was now kind of invading our home. So we did our best to try to figure out ways to reduce sort of that look of the hospital, because when we had guests and stuff as well, to try to make it a little bit more homey was what we wanted to do. Getting the kids involved in his care, teaching the kids how to take care of the pump was another important thing. So we taught them how to use the pump, we taught them how to take care of him, and we just grew up with that part of our life. For information, I went online. There was some community forums that I would read. I would try to go on for tips on how to take care of the tube or for the pump, or different tips about home living with the G-tube. And Isaiah is still fed during the night. You know, right now what we're doing is we hang his bag with a shoelace up on the headboard of his bed right by his head, and then we bought clips. They're from the dollar store, just little pincher clips so that in the morning when we're rinsing out his tube, we rinse it out about 10 times with hot water, and then we hang it close to the sink on a hook, and then we clip the little valve on it to let it drain on its own, and we go and do some other stuff, and then we come back to it.
Because we got released at the very beginning of February. It was really cold, and she was on continuous feeds. So my first experience was that when you take a pump outside that's on continuous feeds, the pump freezes and the alarms go off. And I couldn't figure out why, because they don't tell you that in the hospital. So I had to warm up the car a little bit more and wait until the lines got warm, and then it started again. But it was just one of those things that I wasn't prepared for. And tape. Tape was great. We taped up all the med ports and the lines so that they couldn't be pulled apart easily. Granted, it's harder for you to do once you actually have to switch the lines and prime and things like that, but at least it makes it so there's less accidents in the night. And the big thing for me was sheets and waterproof mattress covers and such. So every time something did happen, we had something ready to go back on the bed, change her back into it, and put her right back to sleep. So things were semi-normal for her, and we just threw the other stuff in the wash. I think for me, the biggest stuff was, I don't know that everyone ever comes off of a G-tube. I didn't expect this to be a permanent thing, so we kind of knew that there would be some feeding aversions and such. We worked with things like how to overcome an oral aversion, even though we didn't really know what that meant at the time, and no one really knew how to overcome that. The team at the hospital came up with all kinds of ideas, and I think my saving grace was when she started teething. I could put little tastes of random things on her teething rings or whatever, and we were saved by popsicles. So fortunately, she really liked them. Even though they're messy, they're worth it.
Some of the everyday challenges that we had to deal with when he was young, when he first started sort of moving around in his crib, was just ensuring that at nighttime when he was being fed, that the cord from his pump giving him food was not getting kinked so that it would beep, and then he'd have to get up and rearrange it. It sort of extended the feeling of having a newborn a little longer, because you're up more at nighttime, because it would get kinked and it would stop flowing, and then the alarm would go off. And I think for families who are concerned about what it's going to be like with a child with a G-tube, I would try to encourage them not to worry about it. I know it's really hard not to. It's a fairly simple process, fairly simple addition to the body that is easy to manage. We ran into very few issues over the years, really, when you think about very few things that really required us to go seek medical attention. But I can understand the fear because it's something that's foreign, it's not something that they're born with, but it is a very simple thing to manage. It's just a matter of learning it, and then you do it and you cope with it in that moment, and after a while you're no longer coping. It's just a regular part of the day and you don't even think about it.
We had a really, really busy home. And when Isaiah was born, it was actually a significant challenge. He was in the NICU for 7 months. We couldn't bring all 6 children into that environment to see him. He was about 5 months old before we could actually be together as a family unit. For the first time, we were all together, the 9 of us as a family, which was very powerful. So we tried to really show the kids that even though we might not be the same as the next door neighbors or as their friends' families, we could make life as normal in our eyes as possible.
It can make you pretty apprehensive to hear all these things about what life can be like and how your life changes, but really you adapt so quickly and things just become your own sense of normal, and how your family functions really doesn't end up changing a whole lot from how it would. You know, all those sleepless nights and things like that don't seem so as big a deal when you have other people who are willing to kind of step in and say, okay, teach me this, like show me how. But it really does show you who's really there for you and who really wants to help you make this work.
I think if I was to say something to other fathers, I would just say be fully involved and know how to deal with issues that might arise with the G-tube. And it's really simple stuff to learn. And you take turns until you're completely competent in knowing what to do. And it's really easy to get to that point because it's not a complicated process.
I think for us it was just important for us to try to keep her life as normal as possible. We didn't cancel her out of swim lessons, or she got to still go to birthday parties, and Todd and I, luckily having a partner and being a couple, we were able to balance that time with her. But I remember the nurse saying to me, he has a sister, are you bringing her in? This was in intensive care at the very beginning, but it was really this that set the tone for how we were going to be dealing with Carlene. And I remember I did say, no way, I'm not bringing my 3-year-old daughter in this environment. She said, do it, because Carlene was out in the waiting room. She said, bring her in, I'll help you.
They wanted to make sure that he wasn't just this mystery sibling, that I didn't have time with him when I was young. So I would go and I would watch TV with him, or color or anything. And so they made it a really friendly environment for me as a 3-year-old to sort of grow up.
She just hopped up on the bed, and that's the way it was. So I think actually we learned a lot from Carlene, and it was simple, and this was her little brother. But I think maybe oftentimes we can learn from children and how simple things are.
If I'm going to be babysitting Jed or something and we're going to go to the park and he needs to get fed, then I'll just bring a bag and bring this syringe and feed, and it's just normal for me. We'll ride our bikes to the park, and then we'll stop maybe on a bench and I'll feed him, and then we'll keep going. Or it's just my normal life. We travel all over the world. We go sailing, we bike, we swim, because we're a really active family, and so nothing's changed, and it's really sort of the normal, everyday routine for us to feed Jed, just like we would feed him orally if he didn't have his tube.
Home nutrition support program, the staff there is fantastic. They are always able to help. They were so calming when I would get flustered with things. But every family situation is different, and every child's story is different, and their other health needs are different, and it didn't matter what I threw at them. They always were open and willing to work through problem solving with me, and encourage me and tell me that I was doing a good job.
I did a lot of pre-preparing. I learned everything I could while I was in the hospital. I talked to the home nutrition staff. I talked to the nurses and the dietitians and everybody I could think of that might have something to say about it. And basically I just kind of said, okay, this is how it's going to be. We're going to take the hospital and put it at home. So I actually got a cart for at home and I stocked it the same way and I did all her meds and everything the same timing, and I made up a little book saying this is kind of what our routine is at the hospital and this is what it's going to be at home. And I made a how-to for dummies of how to change tubes and how to reinsert a G-tube and how to prime a line and what to do if the pump goes off, and pretty much anything that could happen with the pump was in this book. So then when someone else had to take care of her because there was just me, or if something happened to me, then at least they would know what to do.
I totally agreed with the healthcare team, and we had such amazing support from the home nutrition support program. It's still scary, but it was really helpful. They were able to get permission from a family that had a baby with a G-tube in the hospital, and so we were able to actually visit a family and see another baby that had a G-tube before Jed had his surgery. So that kind of put my mind at ease to see a baby up on the unit with a G-tube sitting and watching TV, and he was still in the hospital, but he seemed comfortable. The home nutrition nurse was amazing. When we were definitely transitioning to the point where we were coming home, she sent our pump that we would be taking home to the bedside and all the equipment, the syringes and everything that we would need. And she let me practice with Jed for about the last 5 days or so at the bedside. And I got to help the nurse give him his meds with the syringe and start to slowly feed him and take over his care at the bedside with the nurse supporting us. So that was really helpful. The home nutrition support nurses were amazing. I say they were kind of my lifeline. They were the people that said, you can do this. What are you afraid of? Tell us what your fears are about bringing him home and getting sort of back into a routine, and we'll help you work through that. The learning curve is huge for having a child with a tube. There is a lot to learn. I mean, I don't want to make it seem like this big downer, because there's actually, being a brand new parent, there's so much to learn, but I think the difference between this and packing your diaper bag for a typical child is that you have lots of friends, you can go to Chapters and have a whole aisle of parenting books that'll help you out. You have the internet, but with a child with complex medical needs, and certainly a child with a tube, the resources aren't there for us as much. So I really became dependent on my home nutrition support program for as much information that they could give me to help me with the transition during that time.
When Isaiah had the G-tube put in, it was a practical choice for us. As time went on, it became, while I wanted it to end, I learned to accept it as a blessing, as an option for us. Isaiah's problem is not the G-tube. Isaiah's problem is his health issues, and the G-tube is a tool to help solve that problem. If Isaiah had not been born at this time and in this place, that option might not have been available to us. And so we're thankful for it, because we can watch movies with him now, and we can enjoy his amazing life now in our family, when otherwise we may not have had that option. When times got the hardest and we were tired and we were struggling with things, and when Isaiah was struggling with his feedings, or when we were trying to explain it to people, sometimes just having our lives chunked down into days and just getting this day done, waking up the next morning and starting a fresh new day, eventually the days turn into months and years.
Now, she's actually pretty much off of her G-tube. She doesn't really rely on it anymore. She has it as a backup now for when she starts chemotherapy. So they've decided that if that's something that they do, they want to keep it there. She did have a lot of oral aversions. We work a lot on things that have different textures and different flavors and tastes so that she can really figure out what she likes and what she doesn't like. And we kind of work with those things and try and gear stuff towards what she likes and how she's going to do with those things. Just that it can make you pretty apprehensive to hear all these things about what life can be like and how your life changes, but really you adapt so quickly and things just become your own sense of normal, and how your family functions really doesn't end up changing a whole lot from how it would. You just adapt it to fit your lives and you go on doing whatever you need to do in your own way.
Isaiah is very much like his peers. We do same kinds of things. We go for bike rides and we go swimming, and if we want to go tobogganing, we could. We go to movies, we do things at home. When we're on vacation, I don't think there's really anything that we don't do that other families would do. Mealtime is really simple. In fact, for my wife and I, we can cook whatever we want. Because Isaiah is on Pediasure or Ensure, and his feeding is actually quite straightforward. There's never an issue of, what are we gonna have for supper tonight? We know what he's gonna have for supper tonight. And we fill the pump 3 times a day or 2 times a day, whatever it is. And he has his food, and we just have to plan for it. So we have to integrate that into our schedule. And so we just learn to work around that. But by and large, it doesn't keep us from doing anything that any other family gets to do. If I was to sort of add one final thing about a G-tube, this is kind of a personal thing, because a couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, I was having real issues with swallowing, and I seriously considered the possibility that at some point I would not be able to take food orally, that I might have to have a G-tube someday. And having seen Isaiah with a G-tube and what it's like, and if that ever became a real issue for me that I had to have one, I would just go ahead and do it, because I've seen it, and it wouldn't scare me, and I would go ahead and do it if it actually meant improving my life.
Well, I think for me, I definitely have learned a lot from Jed, whether or not it's feeding tube or just from him as a person. But I've learned it's also taught me sort of responsibility, because you have to make sure, like, he gets a certain amount of feed in the morning and you have to get through it throughout the day. And so it's kind of, you have to get it done, so it's important that you stay on top of it and everything. But it kind of taught me that, like, even if you have something rough in your life, you can get through it, and yeah, everything's gonna be okay. Like, he's such an amazing person, and I've learned so much from him, not only from his feeding tube, but just everything he's been through, and just staying positive, and